Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Progressive Bitcoiner. I'm your host, Trey Walsh, and today we have on the show Dr. Mark Stephany, the previous host of The Progressive Bitcoiner. And this was a very real conversation. It was a great, authentic conversation, a bit tiring, a bit heavy at times, as you'll see from the beginning with some of the things that Mark has been going through personally that a lot of us can relate to right away that you'll get into. But Mark is such a good friend of mine, a good friend to many of us in the space. Such a diligent and hard worker and just a beautiful person trying to live, as we talked about in this episode, trying to live an examined life. And I think that was really the theme of this episode, is living an examined life and what Bitcoiners can do. You know, what are we going to do in this age of freedoms under attack around the world, authoritarian rule where human rights are more needed than ever, privacy tools, Bitcoin, things may continue to get more challenging for Bitcoin and for the things we care about. The honeypot grows in terms of giant corporations and BlackRock and Coinbase in Bitcoin and holding Bitcoin and all of these things, and why it's really important that we continue to fight for these really fundamental human rights that many around the world in different contexts are under attack, and it takes good people willing to do good things to take action on that. So that was a large focus of this conversation, just catching up with Mark. It had been a while, and I know things have been kind of hectic for both of us. So we were able to do that just on air and hit record and have a great conversation. So I really hope you all get a lot out of this conversation. I hope it leaves you thinking again a lot. I think we've been putting out a lot of content recently that's very, very thought-provoking. Been getting a lot of encouraging feedback from people on that type of content, which is really, really great. It's the type of content I really enjoy. I talk a lot about the Progressive Bitcoiner. I talk about the rebrand, talk about some of my own struggles and challenges going through this and why we're looking to pivot and all of that. So I hope you all get a lot out of this episode. You can always touch base with me on Nostr, in our Telegram group, and through email at hello@progressivebitcoiner.com. But really, just encourage you all to sit with this episode, really, really connect with Mark again. I know that he would love to hear from a lot of you all as well, if you wanted to reach out to him. And we've plugged his book as well in the show notes, his medical background and just living a healthy life. And, Mark said on air, he's looking for Bitcoiners to be involved more in the political process. And it sounds like some of us Bitcoiners are going to have to really consider getting involved with politics and running for office and things like that to be the change we want to see. Like, technological change is not enough. There's political change. There's resistance. There's protest. There's things that will come down to us having to use our voices to speak up for what is right beyond just technology, right? So we got into all of that in this episode, but I will let you get into the episode. Please do enjoy the episode. Hit me up with any questions, comments, feedback. It would be great if you all could listen on Fountain as well. It is my favorite place to listen. You can stream sats and support the show through Fountain. We've got our Geyser Fund in the show notes as well for any contributions you want to make to our volunteer effort. That'd be hugely, hugely appreciative as we look to continue to grow, continue to rebrand and get our content out. The downloads and listeners have been going up, which is really awesome to see. We want to continue to reach more people. So any help you can do there would be hugely, hugely appreciative. And thank you so much for those that have already supported. It means the world to me. And just the words of affirmation, sharing our show, leaving comments about it, engaging with it, all of that is stuff we really love to see. So anyway, enjoy the show, and we'll see you again next week. Hey, Mark, how are you? Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Trey. Thank you for having me. It's exciting to catch up after quite a long time.
I know. It's been a while. It's been a lot of craziness. For those that basically everyone knows at this point, you're a former host of The Progressive Bitcoiner. I'm excited to have you on and chat about everything over the past year since we had you on, about so many different things, about the election and where Bitcoin is at in that, to talk about kind of a review of what many in the Bitcoin space know at this point. They consider like the progressive Bitcoiner movement, outside of this, outside of your work, outside of like Jason's book, just anyone on the left saying, progressive Bitcoiners, whether they mean that pejoratively or whether they're like, it's kind of a group here in Bitcoin now, has been really cool to see. So just get a review of that. But I want to kick off, a lot of people are huge fans of yours, constantly appreciative of the work that you've done in the space and what you had built with this pod previously, and things like that. So just for those folks in our audience, what have you been up to this past year? What is life and things been like for you since, taking a step back from this podcast?
Well, I can give you the Midwestern Minnesota answer, the short lie, or I can be honest with you and the audience and the listeners about, the past 2 years of my life. But I think given the fact that those events have shaped, obviously, my opinions and additionally, my relationship to Bitcoin in the space, I think it's important to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
So no, past 2 years have not been great for me and my family. I think as some of the listeners may know, lost a daughter December 9th, 2 years ago at 22 weeks. And then we've lost 3 pregnancies since that time, the latest after a round of IVF. And so it's been awful. It's been the most traumatic time of my life. It's been the most heartbreaking, sad period. And, we're still struggling to know where to go as a family. I feel like I've lost some sense of identity. I don't know the man I was before. The loss and the trauma is different than who I am now. And it's shaped my opinions. If I don't come up with a clear, concise answer to some of the questions that we have in the remainder of the podcast, it's because I think I'm still questioning my own identity, my own beliefs. This whole experience has reshaped all of that. And, but you obviously still have to go on. And I guess the best way I can describe it is like the trauma, the repeated trauma, because it wasn't just, the loss of our daughter Celeste in December. It's been repeated surgeries, pregnancy losses, issues with the medical system, etc. And so these repeated traumas start to feel like these concentric rings of layers of endurance, like on a tree, right? The rings of a tree become the encapsulating you and the endurance that you've experienced throughout all of this. And those like the burlwood, the knots on a tree, like that's how I can just describe it as well. Like that's your trauma. That's where it occurred, and you wall it off. You keep growing, but that injury, that trauma is still there, and it shapes everything about you going forward. It's noticeable on the outside. It's noticeable on the inside. And it's still a weak point, right? It's still a point where a really strong storm can knock you over. And so you always have to be conscientious of that trauma, and I think respect it rather than trying to suppress it. And so, the past 2 years have been awful. I checked out from Twitter and Bitcoin for many, many months, but I've started to dip my toes back in, just peeking in and seeing what people are up to. But I do want to say that I appreciated Bitcoin even more in the constants of it, the infallibility, the anchor, right, in the protocol itself. Like it was not changing. And the price was the volatility, and you can see that in your own life, that volatility. But behind all that is something that is immutable and constant. And I found solace in that, which I think is kind of strange from a technological standpoint, but nonetheless, it was something there that I could hang on to, knowing that was always going to be the same. And it's given me a new appreciation for what Bitcoin is.
Yeah.
So you asked, I could have just said, all things have been fine.
Yeah. I am so sorry to hear that. I find myself getting emotional because as a lot of the listeners know, and as you know, we're expecting our first child in November, and we went through pregnancy scares, and everything is okay. But it's obviously, I mean, this is for many people that are either parents or are going through similar journeys. Like for me, it was a upping of the stakes. It was both my joy and my anxieties were both raised in this process as well. Anticipating being a father, my own conflicted feelings with my own father and my own family, and wanting to be a good father. Like it's one of the things that I want the most. And I'm sorry for, I know in the Bitcoin space there's a lot of the what do you even call it? Just the traditional values, the family values. The if you don't have your parent, if you're not a parent, you're, that's the only thing that's worthy in life. It's not even that stuff. Like, and I'm sorry for that perpetual stuff that I think you see on X sometimes. But for me, it's just something I've always really wanted. And I know too many people that have had similar journeys to yourself. Even the scares that I've had, I can't even imagine more than that, and what that feels like, and the incredible strength that you and your family must have, Mark. And for you to come on and say these things and continue to just wake up and push forward, I think is super admirable for me. I think the reason I gravitated to you even initially is just feeling like your goodness and your ability to deal with adversity, and also your medical background. And I'm sure that must just be frustrating as well. So I'm so sorry to hear this, and I thank you for being honest. I think so many people can connect with this that are listening. It's heartbreaking. It's devastating. There's a whole, it opens up a whole political can of worms. Yeah, I'll just stop it there, because then I probably just will keep losing myself, because this is overwhelming.
It is. And I want to acknowledge the fact that I've not always been steadfast throughout this entire process. Like I still am not. I want to acknowledge my own weaknesses and fallibility. Like I still teeter between, really want to push on and honor my daughter by doing great things, and then paired with just like pure rage and apathy. And so it's a struggle every day. And I think, obviously time does heal, but like I said, that wound will always remain. And I think you have to acknowledge your strength as much as the times that you've faltered during this process. And I certainly have. I've made mistakes with my wife and my family and my daughter. But I think that's one piece of advice as a parent is to acknowledge those. Our parents are probably of the generation where you didn't, right? You didn't want to acknowledge your fallibility. But I think that's one of the most important things that you can do is, we are not perfect and we're going to make mistakes, and I'm going to wrong you in some way. But I want you to know that I still love you. And mm-hmm. I'm not sure there's much more you can ask.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the human experience. Yeah. And I'm just really excited to catch up with you. Really excited for the audience to hear more from you. I'm really sorry for the shittiness. And I'm sure it's complicated. I'm sure there's been so many different periods of joy and being able to take a step back and hopefully unplug from things that have been, I can only imagine what's been refreshing in some regards while dealing with this, and leaning on your partner and having those good days and bad days is super, super human. And again, not trying to be too cheesy or corny with this. It is very interesting, your comment on Bitcoin, and how when you take a step back, like for me, what's been illuminated with Bitcoin or whatever I'm doing or not doing is just bringing these things back down to earth. Like you mentioned, like Bitcoin is this super simple protocol. Like for me, it's just like when I think about Bitcoin now, I think about family, I think about security, I think about like mobility going forward, and the ability that it's given me to be more secure in my future and hope for my family. And I've been significantly less concerned about what is this, Bitcoiner or this Twitter fight happening, or what's this conversation or that. It's when you take a step back year after year, at the same time, not a lot changes with Bitcoin, like you were saying, at the protocol level and what it can do. And that for me has been really reassuring, because I think I'm not sure if you had felt this. I'm curious your thoughts on this. Like especially when I first took over this podcast, and wanting to do good by you as a friend, wanting to do good by those in the community that wanted a sense of some more like progressive and left-leaning content, and putting that out there and combating an overwhelming one-sided narrative of what Bitcoin is in the US specifically. All of that, right? There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure I felt to be plugged in, to be engaged, to do all of that. For me, that came to a head a month or two ago when I was regularly breaking down because of the hate or nonsense received on X, for getting shit on left politicians or whatever, and from the Bitcoin community. And looking at my wife and saying, I have to take a step back, and I don't know what this looks like. I don't know if I can keep doing this. But having just that adjustment in my life has been huge, and has reinvigorated me, and I think made me a much better like pod host, having more authentic conversations, worrying about these things less. So for you, having that experience of running this podcast, and then taking a step back, and gosh, I mean, dealing with all of these hard things in life. What are some things that you've learned being so connected in this space, and then being disconnected? Because you started to talk a little bit about how, Bitcoin's been that constant, but I'm curious just your thoughts and reflections there looking back.
My default at this point in my life is that people are genuinely good and trying to do good by you and for their families. I separate that just as a bit of a tangent from trust, but I do believe that they're trying to do good. And so when somebody does something that is hurtful to me, I give them the benefit of the doubt and try to check my feelings and believe that the way that they're expressing themselves is simply a result of their trauma and what they've experienced in their life to lead them to yell at me or tell me off or in any slight that I feel hurt by. And that's been a lot easier than and quite honestly more fulfilling and happy than taking the opposite approach of returning the hostility. And so when you gauge on X, and I had to try to learn this early on, is the people who are trolling, like, why is that individual doing that? Or assuming that's not a bot, but why is that person doing that? Clearly there's something going on that makes them want to hurt people, probably because they're hurting inside. And the best way I found is just not engaging. You want to stop trolling, stop engaging with it. I'll never forget interacting with NBK like within the first month or so of launching the podcast. And he posted something to the effect of that his wife listened to an episode and said either these people don't know what Bitcoin is or they don't know what progressivism is. And I just replied, I'm really grateful for listening to the podcast. I'm glad your wife enjoyed it. I hope we continue to listen and enjoy the conversation. And he replied to that saying, hey, thank you for not taking a hostile approach and reply in this conversation. And for whatever that perhaps might have changed his impression of the podcast, of you, of me, of the quote unquote movement, I think is a win. And I've learned the same in the hospital. Like even last night, I was on a night shift, and there was a family who was incredibly worked up because their grandma was dying in front of us, basically. And you just have to understand that in that moment, that trauma, that pain is overriding any sense of one's compassion for others or sensibilities. And you have to take a step back and check your own ego and personality, and move forward with a little bit more compassion, which again, I would acknowledge is still incredibly hard. I some days feel like Jekyll and Hyde, where compassionate, but then I fail. And I just try to continually do better. I think Troy Cross hit the nail on the head a couple of years ago when he was interviewed and said that, Bitcoin is a Rorschach test. And I think one of the things that I have been disappointed by with a lot of Bitcoiners, and I think from the right, is they see Bitcoin and they find this incredible sense of validation. that here is this thing that appears to be more libertarian and conservative, and therefore I am right and you all still remain wrong. I think it's, arguably, I think it's relatively, I'm even questioning this because I feel like I'm falling back on stereotypes, but whether it's more of a conservative thing and more of a libertarian thing, or is it more progressive, Bitcoin itself, the protocol and what it does for society. That question aside, let's assume that it's from a stereotypical standpoint, it's harder for the left to get into Bitcoin. So it takes that leap. And from a Rorschach perspective, what you see in it, right, you see the right, you see conservatism, you see everything that you hate. And obviously it is not that, it's this neutral protocol. But then you look from the right and the conservative perspective, and it's entirely validation and thinking you're right, and therefore everyone needs to conform to still this world view that you already hold. And I would encourage people to check those affirmations and pair them against Bitcoin itself, because I don't think you're going to grow as an individual if you see what you already believe to be true for the entirety of your life. You look at your previous podcast with Hoddle and Carson, they were liberal, or and progressive individuals for the majority of their life. They saw Bitcoin and it pivoted them more toward, away from just this more strict ideology dogma of political views. They had to begin to question those views. And for many, many people, that questioning is the hardest part of this journey, because you don't want to question yourself. You don't want to invalidate your own beliefs, because those beliefs are your identity. And the hardest thing you can ever do is question one's own identity, right? That's shattering to an individual. And Bitcoin can do that in a very passive way. Trauma can do that in an immediate and incredibly powerful way. And that's kind of what I've been living through the past 2 years, is that that questioning. And so that was a long-winded answer of how I've been rethinking my approach to Bitcoin and how others see it.
Yeah, I think episodes I've been doing recently have been heavier. I think it's a reflection of my personal journey and a lot of our personal journeys. And I think, you alluded to Hoddle and Eric's episode. It's even getting into, to question your beliefs and ideology. It's that, but also you have to question our world. And I don't mean, because there's some people that go, they profit and make that their identity is questioning everything in the world. But I mean, getting outside of the dogma of like the two-party system of these things, and really questioning things that should be questioned because it's not what it seems on the surface. Not just doing the Tim Pool type, I'm going to make millions off of just questioning everything. Like that's silly. That's childish in the other direction. And that to me is the most Bitcoin experience in terms of, and there are two different things. There's Bitcoin, the protocol, that I still firmly believe anyone and everyone can use for better, for worse, for whatever. It is an open source protocol. It is a tool. And then there's the journey of what some of us might see as the mission of Satoshi with this project, which is to separate money from the state, to not have this control of central banks and authorities and authoritarians to issue money and what that does. That's a different experience, and that's a different thing. Now you can choose to use Bitcoin just in that first camp, where it's a tool or it's an asset in your Wall Street portfolio. It's all these things. Or you can also choose the second one, which again doesn't fall under a political label necessarily, but I still hold firm to it falls under an anti-authoritarian label. I talked about that with Bradley Rutler recently, and I'm like, I think, I don't really believe there's Bitcoiners and they're all like this one thing, but it's more like, I'd like to think a big commonality is at least questioning authority and kind of an authoritarian approach to life, now that we have tools that help the individual and community more than ever. And I still firmly believe progressives and the left haven't fully realized yet that we don't have to use state money. Like that's a very new concept. We didn't have those tools. Like previously the most was gold or metal coins. This is the newest time where we have this invention that did not exist, that we don't have to use these issued currencies, right? And obviously it's very hard to live in the world without doing that. I'm just saying at a technical level, we now have this ability to use money without a middleman. And that is incredibly new. That is a part of this journey that I'm having the podcast focus a lot more on. Now that includes some really hard and heavy conversations that we try to sprinkle in, like, hey, thank God for Bitcoin though. Throughout this process, to not just have it be this like, I want you to crumble and kind of this post whatever world, but acknowledging that is huge. And I think I've learned that quite a bit more. That is, I want to use this platform to talk about more.
The questioning element, I think that is going to be a key for the near term success of our society and individuals. It's not, we can ask questions all day. We can Google anything that we want. It's the quality of those questions that I think is important, because yes, the Tim Pool, you're going to question everything, but as you said, that's not appropriate. So what do you question? And that's a really important thing to consider for oneself. What do I question? What do I challenge? And it's hard because it's taxing. It's stressful. People are already stressed. And this is another, it's not so much like a conclusion, but how I've been feeling. Like I hear, still listening to a lot of the podcasts and talking about the problems. It's just part of my friendship. What the fuck are you going to do about it? You've got your Bitcoin now, but what if they're going to 6102? What are you going to do? They do unrealized gains. What are you going to do? And you can go down through the entirety of the list of attacks on Bitcoin, your personal freedom, sovereignty, etc., and moving to your ranch in the country and your 3D printed guns. Like that's it. That's your solution to the issue. I find that hard to believe. And my pessimistic view is that we're not going to do a damn thing. There's going to be no revolution. There's going to be no revolt. There's going to be no means by which to do anything about the increasing authoritarian tendencies that we see, not only in the United States, but globally. And I encourage all of us to play those scenarios out in our head. It was, is it Whitney Webb? Is that her name? And then Mark.
Yep.
Laying out all these scenarios and the Larry Fink and capturing of Bitcoin from an institutional perspective. What are you going to do about it? I understand the problems. I understand that's a possibility, but what are you going to do when that comes down? And I have a hard time believing that there's going to be a mass movement, that there's going to be a mass march, that there's going to be a damn thing that can be done. And I think that's obviously incredibly sad. But moreover, I think the important thing is to be thinking about those scenarios, not just the attack vectors, but what are we going to do about it? And I think, generally speaking, as humans, we've a point in our history when hardships, environmental hardships, and public health measures have made our lives a hell of a lot more comfortable. We are comfortable in our comfort, and I think the frog in the water analogy is perfect in this situation. I don't think we're going to do a damn thing about it until we're boiling. I don't see any evidence of that in recent times to believe otherwise. It's certainly how we treat our own lives, right? We don't take care of ourselves until we have the cancer diagnosis, until we have the heart attack. We don't take care of our financial sovereignty until it becomes problematic. We don't invest in our friendships to the extent that we have until something starts to fracture. It's a time preference situation where we don't we just don't think towards the future to try to prevent those things. We are comfortable in our comfort, and I don't see that changing. That's my, forgive me, my pessimistic view about the whole space. I do think there are potentially bright spots, but that's one of the questions that I've been mulling over is like, what are you going to do? And I have some thoughts about that, but I'll stop.
Yeah, I've gotten, a lot more we talk on the podcast of, I've always been really, really intrigued to focus on, human rights and where we're headed as a world, especially for those that are in no position of privilege, whether it's a family structure, marriage structure, monetary, what have you, on this show. And you had done the same, along with some FUD points that we had to address, like environment, this, and that. At some point, there's been a lot of content out there about that. There's been good research. There's been a lot of things that we, let's say from the progressive side, wanted to check off that we have. And at least if someone says a rebuttal about the environment, about whatever, we can say, go back and listen to that episode. Go and listen to that book. We're not going to keep doing this. We're moving on. Like, we have bigger things to focus on. And my bigger thing to focus on is a lot of what you're talking about. Privacy, freedom, free speech. These things continuing to get worse and worse. Like in the UK, really, really policing social media and literally arresting people. These kind of things. I've been trying to be a vocal proponent from the left, saying, if you're on the left, do not go along with these things, even if it's someone from the right that you disagree with. These type of things. And I think Bitcoin, even since I first got in 2021, has so many more tools and technology, the technology ability to be censorship resistant and to combat these things. What we don't have a good answer for, and there just isn't, because it depends on your level of resistance and your political resistance that has always happened throughout history. For those that are, let's say, the good guys in a particular fight, is the moment to resist. The moment to resist and let your voice be heard, especially in a democracy, and sometimes the moment to resist in authoritarian regimes. Like that consistently happens throughout history.
But what does resistance look like?
Exactly. So that's kind of my point that I'd love to discuss with you here as well is, it is getting to the point where things are going to continue going in this way, right? Like you have the technological means right now to go to your ranch in Wyoming, to have your hardware wallets scattered around the world, to this and that, to use privacy protocols and in certain regards, the ones that are still operating for Bitcoin. But what happens when they show up and arrest you? What happens when they arrest you for being a developer? What happens? And I think for me, it's that mix of trying to engage in the political process, like doing the steps. And I try to reiterate, these are American values. We have the Constitution. I'm talking just in the US in this specific moment. Have the Constitution. We have the courts. We're going to use these means and not just say okay to things that are illegal. Like when Elizabeth Warren tries to put forth legislation that is a backdoor ban, saying, fuck that. No, that's illegal. As Americans, we have a right to property, these kind of things. So using those means, but it could come to a point where that doesn't matter because an emergency order is put into place, like, Patriot Act type stuff for transactions, for monetary transactions. I don't think we're out of the woods on that. I'm kind of in the middle on a doomsday scenario and everything's fine, Bitcoin's won scenario. But I could be very wrong. Things are rapidly changing, and the privacy and freedom aspect for me is deeply concerning. So I'm curious your thoughts on what resistance looks like.
A few thoughts, and we'll start with the one that you'll enjoy the most. More, you and Jason need to run for office.
Oh, God. My wife's going to kill me. More
Bitcoiners need to run for political office and join just jump into the belly of the beast, because
I have thought about that more. It's funny. Like I know Peter McCormack is teasing this, and I'd put his odds maybe at 65% of doing that right now. Jack Mahler's joked about, not joked. I think he was kind of serious. He's a very ballsy dude, running for Chicago mayor.
Yeah, and Ovik Roy should run for president. That
Dennis Porter, I will say it here. I'd bet money he's going to be running for something within the next 4 years. I think that's inevitable. So he hasn't said anything to me, by the way. No. I'm not like leaking anything, but I just have a feeling.
Yeah, and I think it should be a call to action. Like the idea that you can be a passive spectator in this whole thing and think things are going to be successful is entirely naive. And,
Yeah.
you know,
So you mean, sorry to cut you off. You mean those people that are like, I'm not going to engage in the political process. I'm just going to live on my ranch in Wyoming. That kind of thing.
yeah, exactly. You're not, that does not bode well for Bitcoin's success and adoption. I think that is, there's no debating that point. The fewer people that have Bitcoin and use Bitcoin, the more likely that some of these extreme measures can be taken. Yes, the protocol will continue on, but it can be completely, it can be stifled, and at least in the United States to a great degree. I don't think there's any debate about that point. So Bitcoin calls upon all of us to act in some way, in some manner. And just because you bought it is the most basic thing that you can do, right? It's incumbent upon all of us to do more. And I think running for political office is that thing for that we truly need to acknowledge. And because it's not going to change without us. How about that? Mm-hmm. You have to get into, again, the belly of the beast to, I think, change it. And it's not, you could say that, I think the difference is that Bitcoiners have already a commonality, no matter what kind of perspective you're coming from, at what angle, right? Whether that's your predisposition towards libertarianism or progressivism, you have that commonality. That's a good starting point. Two, if things play out well, a lot of Bitcoiners are going to have a lot of money and influence. Those two combinations, I think, are going to be important for actually creating change. Because if there are not people who are favorable to Bitcoin itself, I don't see things changing from a political standpoint. And I'd be hard pressed to say that any anarchist, any libertarian, not wanting to have anything to do with that, would not want to see beneficial changes occur. I think those. Yeah, I'll kind of leave it at that. That's got to run for office.
Yeah, well, I think Eric's point in talking with me recently was, he's an anarchist, and he was like, I think there needs to be I would love to see people do this kind of third party movement, not a third party necessarily, but some sort of new movement that does see people involved in a new process. So I think, I don't know too many Bitcoiners that would be opposed to that. I think I can understand the Bitcoiners that are opposed to the two-party system currently. It is still hard for me to understand the Bitcoiners that are like rah Trump. I'm going to be honest. I understand Bitcoiners that are like, I don't like the Democrats' approach or Kamala's approach, and I don't like Trump's approach in all of this. I just like, to hell with all of it. I don't like that. I can, and I'm just being honest here. It's not the right thing. That's just my opinion. I am very, very sympathetic to if they're not in the progressive camp or whatever, the anarchists or the libertarians that are like, this system is crumbling and failing, and I don't know how much we can change just fitting Bitcoin or fitting even outside of fitting our views on freedom of speech, on money, on privacy, on freedom, all these things that are just very much under attack at a global level. Human rights focuses into this current two-party system without some sort of shakeup.
I think much like Bitcoin is a Trojan horse for financial and economic policy, Bitcoiners who run for office will have to Trojan horse the election to get in. I don't think you're going to run on, solely, I'm a Bitcoiner, I'm going to get elected. I don't think that's going to happen. You're going to have to, in a sly, roundabout way, have those sentiments in your back pocket, but get elected in a traditional way. I just don't think there's enough people supporting it to have that happen. But nonetheless, I think the point remains: we have to run for office, even if we don't want to, even if we don't feel like it's going to do any good. It's just what's not going to do any good is not doing anything about it. Like, to me, it's a binary decision. You can hope for the best, right and leave things up to Elizabeth Warren and et cetera, or you can actually engage in the process and try to change it. And again, with that similar shared beliefs within the Bitcoin community, to the extent that there are, and then eventual financial means, I think that is possible. And the thing is, Bitcoin is not one sole industry. You're not going in as a real estate magnate or an oil magnate who has all this money, and you've got this one industry that you're focused on. Bitcoin is obviously so diverse and widespread that I think that translate also into a more practical and pragmatic approach towards politics and legislation in general. Does that make sense? Like it's not you don't go in solely as a Bitcoiner just to defend Bitcoin. I think that translates into policy changes in your politics and in general, as opposed to, I'm Trump, I'm a former real estate mogul, and that's going to frame a lot of my potential policy decisions.
Yeah, I mean, tax breaks and daddy issues. that's his default. The one thing, I don't think it's a hot take. I think maybe a lot of people would agree with it. I think if I was trying to read the tea leaves and had to guess, still one of the biggest influences in terms of the space, and I think they are still at this point the biggest super PACs are the crypto lobbies. Of course, there's David Bailey pushing Bitcoin stuff to Trump, and I've expressed my opinions on that and all of that. That's fine. That's individuals' right. But the crypto PACs that are really, I think, going to be informing Coinbase, very heavily active in both campaigns at this point. So forever interacts with whoever wins the presidency, be it Trump or Kamala Harris at this point. It's very likely that, Coinbase is already the giant honeypot for all of the ETFs. You mentioned BlackRock and all of these others. Like, I think the next stage is going to be quite a lot of crypto, quite a lot of, keep it on our exchange because it's private. And I do worry that we're still heading in that direction where crypto and Bitcoin are going to be more accessible and maybe even more integrated into our world, but it's replicating similar problems where you're trusting an exchange, you're trusting a middleman, you have limits. They can surveil what you do, which is terrible for like Russian human rights activists and others, and donating it. And again, getting away from the world of privacy as a default. Like, privacy should be our default for things. We're heading into that. And I am worried that it's going to take another catastrophic, like FTX looks like nothing compared to what could be coming, for us to get back towards, why are we talking about Bitcoin? Why are we focusing on Bitcoin? Why do we have all of these tools to hold your own keys? Like, all of these things. And perhaps I'm overplaying that because there are so many great and easier self-custody tools and emphasis on Bitcoin and why that's different than crypto. And not just that, like, crypto is all shit coins, but really robust conversation about, like, okay, here's some crypto projects, but this is why Bitcoin is still different. And I try to talk about that more rather than saying crypto is shit coins, because then people just kind of put up that wall about, he's just this worships Bitcoin type thing. But I am worried, at least in this next halving cycle, this next election cycle, it's the crypto influence is clearly here and huge, like the biggest money influencing campaigns, honeypots, security issues, privacy. The 3-letter agencies are all over these things. Super concerning to me in terms of why a lot of us are in Bitcoin. It's kind of the antithesis to why a lot of us are here, regardless of political ideologies.
Yeah, sometimes I shouldn't say sometimes. I always feel like I'm taking crazy pills with the crypto. I just don't understand how this Wizard of Oz character still exists. Talking about critically thinking and questioning one's positions, how these projects still exist, how there's tokens that are worth anything. I can't wrap my head around it, and the fact that doesn't seem to be like obvious to everybody involved in the who are being discussed, who they're lobbying to. I don't know. So clearly, I think they may be just influenced by the money. But yeah, I don't. It's not going to go away, in my opinion. It's going to be there. I think it's recreating the current financial system on steroids. Well, there'll be another collapse probably because people don't learn from their mistakes. So yeah, I think that'll continue to play out, and we will pick up people on the margins. But each time that happens, there's obviously going to be increasing regulations until they've captured the entire industry, including Bitcoin to the extent that they can. And so again, what are you going to do about it? Yelling at Chris Larson and Vitalik and so forth is not going to. It's not going to change anything. I just don't see it going away because the greed and the money is so powerful in that right now. And it's it's the inertia of our current financial system on steroids, and people are making so much money on it. Why the hell would they? Oh yeah, you know what? It doesn't make sense that these tokens are worth anything. Nobody's using them for any type of utility, and if they were for utility, why is the price going up? To be able to, this logically doesn't make any sense. So I just don't see them doing that. It's not going to go away. And I get back to my question: what are you going to do about it? And I don't think there's anything that can be done unless politicians, again, where Bitcoiners are in office, or we somehow can pool together capital to do our own lobbying and play that game. But it kind of gets me to my second point about overall trying to answer the question: what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about the increasing regulation that will be coming down the pipe? And that's adding an A to the free and open source software movement, and that's anonymous. Like, you have to mirror Satoshi's actions, because in my opinion, a lot of the companies that are out there, Bitcoin companies, are recreating the financial system. It's creating financial rails, but it's the middleman stuff. It's fees, and those are all attack vectors. Your LLC is an attack vector.
Yeah, like if someone's only touch point with Bitcoin, love them to death, Jack Mallers and Strike, like they only use Strike to buy, to send, to do that, then that effectively cuts off their access to Bitcoin unless they know of other tools.
Yeah, exactly. They can be shut down, and we will see that. We have seen that. I have no reason to believe that it won't continue to occur. And so it's a very lofty, idealistic viewpoint, but you want Bitcoin to succeed, you have to kind of take on the spirit of Satoshi and do things for free and anonymously and not receive any credit for it, which is an incredibly challenging thing to do financially from your ego and so forth. But it's how Bitcoin succeeded, arguably, to get where it is now. The fact that it doesn't have a CEO, the fact that it is anonymous. And I think we want to continue to see it succeed. You're going to have to see FOSSA, free and open source software that's anonymous, flourish. And I'm sure there are people doing that. But yeah, again, every time you see a new app or whatever roll out, it charges a fee. It's just like, and I'm curious to get your opinion. This is something I don't see talked about. What about the hardware? Wouldn't it take just a phone call to Apple saying, hey, we don't want any Bitcoin or crypto related apps on your iPhone? Like, you've got to screen that. Like, what are we going to do? That's how we interface entirely with.
Hi everyone, hope you're enjoying the episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Bitbox. Now, Bitbox is a hardware wallet that's open source, incredibly secure and easy to use, and it's what I'm using to safely secure my Bitcoin in cold storage. Now, I know self-custodying Bitcoin can really be intimidating, but Bitbox is designed for ease of use without compromising on security. It's USB-C compatible and allows you to easily back up and restore your private keys with a micro SD card, which is really cool. Now, you can purchase the Bitbox using the promo code TPB at the link found in the show notes for 5% off your purchase. And I really want to thank Bitbox for their support of the podcast. All right, I'll let you get back to the episode now. Yeah, well, I think for me, what's interesting with that is, like, Nostr is an interesting experiment with that, because Nostr has some of the wildest development in terms of everywhere, like whether it's iOS, Android, progressive web apps, all of these different things. And I think taking the spirit of some of that and developing wallets and access to Bitcoin around that, I think the hardware wallet landscape year after year continues to grow and diversify in terms of like um, multi-sig options, in terms of way to connect, whether it's progressive web apps, whether it's desktop clients, whether it's, yes, the easiest is still iOS apps and things like that. But the variety and ways to have access to securing your coins grows year after year. Obviously, there's certain attack vectors with how someone operates, like what warehouse they use and where is that located jurisdictionally. Like there's arguments around that, but year after year that continues to get better. My biggest worry, and I think everyone would share this, any of the 1031, the open sats, the people that are just trying to get out just funding and as much funding as quickly as possible to keep building tools so we can mitigate these risks, to decentralize every process, to have as many options, flood the market while we also do political fights. So it has to be the political fights or the political activism. I don't mean like fight. And I try to be very coherent of this as the podcast gets bigger, that I never would advocate for violence in any of these things. And when I say resist and protest, I am here in the US and many nations. We have the right to protest. We have the right to speak our opinions. We have the right to meet with our legislators and say, this is crazy. This is not American. This is not okay. So while we do that, while we engage in that process, which you're saying is very important, we also engage the process of technologically getting better and better and better. So the attack vectors are not as easy, not as simple. So it's, if shit really hit the fan today, I don't think we're prepared. I think we're massively better prepared than 2016, but we are still far and away, like the App Store. Like if Apple could shut down most of the Bitcoin wallets and things that people are kind of using day to day, whether it's Cash App, a lot of things, like a lot of these companies, a lot of these tools, companies are attack vectors today, and I don't think we're prepared. I think it's still getting better. I think they're getting more comfortable with the captured edition of Bitcoin.
Oh, for sure.
All of these things are still risks.
People, again, this gets to my earlier point. They don't care. They don't care. You're not going to do anything to fight it, to fight against this until it happens to you. Enough people will not care. They'll be fine with their ETFs. They'll be fine with the eventual passive retirement flows into it. You're not going to, I just don't believe people are going to do a damn thing about it, quite honestly.
My only little bit of pushback on that point is I think there is a caveat of, I don't know to what degree though, do you think that the worth and value of Bitcoin would be diminished in terms of the protocol? Not the protocol, because the protocol can still always exist, whether people use it or not, or whether it's banned in a certain country or not. But in terms of those that would like to have it as this incredible scarce asset that has all of these properties that are super unique, do you think that diminishes? So do you think even the BlackRocks, the Michael Saylors, that would try to fight against that as well, should shit hit the fan, because it would devalue the essence of that product, both the monetary premium, whatever the USD price, but also the asset itself, making it less valuable as a tool if all of those rails were cut off and it was like you can only hold it KYC, you can't send it in a self-custody wallet, and it's just an asset in the ETF. How does that come into the equation for you, or does that not impact the risk here?
The people with the greatest amount of money, if just as long as their number still goes up, probably don't give a damn about those other elements in the end. And for those of us that do, again, what are you going to do about it?
Right. But I'm saying the number might be affected. Like, what if the number go up is affected if Elizabeth Warren's legislation was very unlikely to pass, but that whatever iteration floats around comes into being, where proof of work mining is banned in the US and then other places follow. Hash rate plummets, maybe it recovers a little bit.
You hit the pocketbooks of the biggest mining companies out there and the billionaires who own it, and the Larry Finks. If number go up does not occur with those interventions, then they'll be hearing about it. And I don't think that type of legislation would pass. But the caveat there is number go down, right? That's the only thing that I think would tip the scales for action from those that have really any power.
Yeah.
Again,
What is that? And that's probably one of my toughest things with, because of those on the left that do, let's say they do understand Bitcoin, they do understand what we're talking about, but they're into, because I've met some that are into other crypto or privacy crypto, defaults or
mhm,
cryptocurrencies, things like that, because they feel Bitcoin is too captured. They feel Bitcoin is too, and by capture, I mean the momentum, the price action, the people talking about it, the industry, whatever, is very Wall Street. Like they see someone like the Jamie Dimons coming in, they see the BlackRocks,
right,
they see the other. And from a real leftist Occupy perspective, it is like we say, like, no one can control your Bitcoin, and that's still 100% true. But people can and are manipulating the price action in terms of these whales buying and dumping and holding off and doing these sophisticated measures that do impact the price because it's a buy sell. It's a very liquid market. So that's impacted. But your Bitcoin, your ownership, as long as you hold your own keys, the block times every 10 minutes, these things are not impacted by wealthy people's. Like no one can impact the protocol in that way, depending on how much you own it. But the price action and what people are into Bitcoin for quite a bit is they want it as a savings asset. They want the number to go up. So some people are like, from a leftist view, sometimes it gets harder to articulate the importance of Bitcoin at this point in time with those factors at play currently.
yeah, and I guess I'm just arguing that the majority of Americans who do or will own Bitcoin won't care,
Yeah.
and those that do will need to be able to rely on other resources.
Mhm.
Whether that's Monero or some other token. Um, but there's obviously a huge ecosystem that's working on these issues. And privacy, again, I relate this to health. Like you don't care about it until it's gone. And I don't think within the United States that there's enough people who are going to care about that um, to do anything about it. Unless it hits NGU, I see some of these draconian things coming down the pipe. And again,
Mhm.
ask yourself, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to move? Okay, that's great. That's not going to do anything to further the movement here in the United States. But I think the issues for privacy, et cetera, are some of these other elements of outside of number go up in the United States. They're obviously more important to a lot of the people who use Bitcoin outside the United States in
Mhm.
authoritarian regimes. Like those privacy tools need to be available for them. Um, I don't see enough Americans giving a damn to do anything about it. Like, good God, two wars. Roe v. Wade gets repealed under a Democratic administration. There was some bitching and moaning for a few weeks, and now we've gone on our merry lives.
Mhm.
I don't. That again, I relate these sentiments back to a part of me that's still hurting and bitter and angry
Yeah.
and apathetic. So forgive me if it sounds um, whatever you want to label it with. But that's just kind of where I'm at right these days.
I do look, I like to create the content that I like hearing. and I really like things that push and are thought provoking. Um, I hope that people listen to this show and it makes them think. It's not going to leave with clear cut answers. Like we're talking about some of the biggest challenges in our world and for our future over like this digital world that we live in post 9/11 and money and every institution crumbling around the world and freedoms. What are we going to do about that? That is the open question. And we're not going to leave here with an answer today, but it's questions that everyone should be asking. I will say, just reflecting on my own journey, the reason I got into Bitcoin is because I was angry, I was dissatisfied, I was frustrated as a millennial. I was thinking that Democrats have been saying things for so long, just as a Republican, whoever, but that was my party. They keep saying things. Elizabeth Warren keeps saying that she's going to help the working class, but income inequality in Massachusetts is the worst in the country, or one of the worst in the country. These things they're not changing. they're getting people really, really angry about things. And like you said, like I'm huge proponent. I mean, we're both talking about fatherhood and these things. And one of the things that perhaps is a separate tangent and, triggering for some folks. I'm not sure how you can be a freedom maxi and want to live in places that are restricting reproductive rights and health for women and these things that we've seen. But right, like, what are Democrats going to do about it? What are these things? Because what happens when that happens, or whatever cause it is, but let's say abortion rights, healthcare access, the Democrats say, well, the Republicans did that. Right. That's
I
kind
hate
of
that.
the
I
modus
hate
is
that.
like,
Right.
well, blame them. Don't blame us. That is
Right.
Elizabeth Warren's go-to.
They
That's
do it.
AOC's
They do it
go-to.
too. Like that's such a straw man. And you
Yeah.
encounter that same pseudo argument in your day-to-day life. Like you bring up the atrocities that Democrats have done. You bring up, the facts that I just mentioned. It's like, oh, but Trump is a psychopath.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that doesn't negate the other, right? And it becomes incredibly frustrating, and that's why I think I'm a bit apathetic towards the whole system. I think it's perfectly designed to get the results that it has, and we're at this kind of stalemate where nothing's really getting done. That's the nature of politics. It takes so long to get good done, but only a second for atrocity and evil to occur, and that's why it feels like in some way we're voting for the lesser of the two evils, because we don't want bad to happen. The good to occur, some shining light for all Americans doesn't seem possible anymore, because it'll be the Democrats who want to propose it, or it'll be the Republicans who want to propose it, and therefore it's not good.
Yeah, our political process, I don't think it's just JFK. In terms of leaders, in terms of approach of what this is all about, like leadership or the U.S. or values, has been really fractured since JFK. I think this is my personal opinion. Since then, and you feel it so much today. And so many Americans are going to the polls and they're like, well, the lesser of two evils, the lesser of two evils, the lesser of two evils, and it gets cemented. And then factor in social media, factor in mental health, factor in gun violence, factor in everything. And what I've talked about a lot on this show recently is like the rise of independence, right? Like I've been an independent for a few years now, quite a few. I think Jason Mayer said on the show, I don't think he's ever been affiliated with a political party. Many others, there's the rise of people saying, I don't want to be a part of any process. I don't like either candidate, all of this stuff. So it's like at some point, it's got to come to a head. And I don't mean necessarily violent. I mean, that clearly happens around the world and in the US at different points. But it's more like my hope, and I guess the optimism I'm clinging to, is at some point, hopefully people will kind of look around and say, okay, we do have other ways to do things, because most people would agree our current way of doing it is not working for many things, whether it's practically affording life, whether it's just like all the infighting online, whether it's all the wars, all of these things. People know that it's broken, and they've known for quite some time. We can't keep talking about that, and we can't keep every election saying this is a fight for our democracy and nothing changing. So everyone's sick and tired, but people are starting to learn of maybe some solutions, some tools that they can have for themselves, learning about things like Bitcoin, learning about the risks of, centralized services and social media and just the rot on our brains and all of these things. So that's where my optimism lies currently. But I'm like, what can push us over the edge? Because most people are already there. They just don't know where to go. Like you said, it's this stalemate.
Do you
We're just
think
kind of looking around.
Do you think it's the most people that feel that way? Because again, might be a bit more pessimistic. I think that you get the right person from the left who wants to squash those people on the right, and our righteousness on the left will put that person in power, and we will have put in the very thing that at least I felt is what we're railing against, and that's the suppression of other people's right to live freely. And I see the vitriol. Obviously, it's on the right too, but it's more from a a paternalistic, hierarchical, I have the moral high ground. And the problem with that is that you can justify your actions. You can justify any type of reduction in privacy or rights or violence, if it were to come to that, to those people who don't agree with you, because you have the moral high ground. And I see that thread within the Democratic Party. I see that in people I talk to and neighbors, where it's, again, a moral high ground issue. And I felt that way for years. Like, you are a bad person because you feel that way. In the past 2 years of my life and the COVID experience has really shifted that for me. And what it comes down to is Craig Wormke's paper on Behind the Veil. Don't just apply that to Bitcoin. Apply that to your political views and your interactions with others, because it's by mere chance that you are who you are in your life. And so try to be behind the veil for just a moment, and find that commonality, that common thread that you may have with somebody, and understand that the political apparatus is trying to fight against that. But I would hope that in all of us, that thread exists, and we're just being pulled away from it by the political system wanting to divide us, because that's obviously how you maintain your power. So try to refocus on that. And I think the Behind the Veil exercise is an incredibly important tool to be able to do that. And that was one of the things that was so great about your podcast with Huddle and Eric, is obviously they said stuff that you didn't agree with it, but you had this common thread, and it was a beautiful thing to listen to. And that outside of X or their platform, like these are good people, and they're trying to do good. You're trying to do good. We're all trying to do that, and we need to honor that basic fact and not fuck it up by falling prey to division.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I personally cannot, at a very forward level, be really comfortably a part of this political process or this two-party system. Be comfortable being on X. I'm not personally on X anymore. We throw up the podcast wherever because I want as many people to have access to it as possible. I'm not going to, because people just aren't on Nostr, slowly more and more. But I'm not going to be. That's also, you mentioned the moral hierarchy. That's kind of on the other end. It's like moral hierarchy of, well, if you're not on Nostr, you're not going to hear these things that would expose you to maybe things you haven't heard on your centralized platform. It's like, well, those are the exact content. So whatever. So I can't be a part of that. Go ahead.
Again, I don't think people want to. You're comfortable with X. You're comfortable with Instagram. You're comfortable with what it's feeding you, and it's reinforcing it. It's validating, and that all feels good. And we encourage people to question these things, but doing so is painful sometimes, and it's hard to do. And I can tell you, people don't want to change. People don't until it slaps you across the face.
Well,
I think
go ahead, Mark. Go ahead. This is such a good conversation. People are going to be like, this is great.
I'd say that Socrates is full of shit, and that clearly people are not are quite comfortable living in an unexamined life.
Yes.
Is it easy to have a examined life when you have the luxury of doing so? You're not stressed with trying to put food on the table. Absolutely. But I'd say billions of people across the world are quite comfortable with living unexamined if their life is relatively comfortable. And it's until that water starts boiling that you're going to make change. And I say that not only from what appears to be historical experience, where you look through the past century and the events that have triggered and what people ended up doing, what it took to do those things, but see it in the hospital every damn day. You're going to make choices that are not good for you, and you're going to have the heart attack, the cancer diagnosis, when you should have done something differently. And damn, I should have done that. We have the fallacy that things are going to continue to be as they are into the future, when they're so clearly not.
When you were saying that people are comfortable on that, like I don't know that they are. I think, again, I could try to speak for me and not try to assume for other people. There are quite a few people in that category saying, I think the category continues to grow of the people that at their dinner table with their friends are having these conversations, but they're not having it at work, or they're not having it to their peer group or online, right? They're putting up the caricature of whatever out in public, but behind the scenes with their closest people, they're like, this is a dumb example, but okay, we went a little hard on those COVID lockdowns, or like things like that, like, liberal friends, just using that as a rain example, fill in the blank for whatever way of life you think is representative of your party and worldview. And I think there are a lot of people that are constantly engaged in the echo chamber on social media or this and that. And it's like eating too much junk food. You feel like shit. So I do think a lot of people feel like shit. It doesn't mean they'll stop doing that, but I don't think people are happy doing it. And I do think the number of people willing to try to live an examined life or to try to have these thoughts are growing, because it happened for me. It happened for you. And I'd like to think that more people, that number will keep growing. Is everything we're talking about very countercultural? Absolutely. Is that going to take a lifetime to change? Probably. I don't know that we'll get to that full point in our lifetime. I do think catastrophe will strike within our lifetime, whether it's in this country, whether it continues to be global wars, other things that require people to live examined lives, and their lives will not continue as it has before. I don't see that as a possibility. And so I do think slowly people, and I've said this, I've started to say it more openly, and people know we're pivoting to rebooting money. I think I'm more convicted than ever that the left and progressives or whoever will still find a home with content we create, because I was and am sort of one still that, relatable. I'm going to put out things that I believe in, think about, and think a little bit less about what category it falls under, as is the point of independent podcasting and Bitcoin and all that stuff. But I will say a lot of people have continued to want me to be, I want you to be the Democrat Bitcoiner. You need to be the progressive Bitcoiner. And I'm like, well, there's a lot of practical reasons. Like, you guys are saying this now, but never supported before. Okay, that's fine. Second of all, I don't want to be. I don't feel good about that. I think that perpetuates the problems that I would try to get away from and I don't want to be a part of. And I've learned that over time. I tried to create content. I think we both did, and I think a lot of people continue to do, to try to appeal to those people. But I'm not naturally an evangelist. I'm repulsed by that. I grew up in that fundamental religious environment, and I'm not a fan of evangelism. I'm a fan of when people are ready, accessing things that they need to take time with, right? Like I enjoy long form podcasts. I enjoy reading books. These things are not things you learn and inherit in 2.5-minute clips or viral YouTube, whatever. Maybe there's things that you start with that you see and then you engage more. This is a long process, the things we're talking about. And I'm much more a fan of advocating for that people are going to have to put in the work to realize this, just like you have to put in the work for your health, like you've talked about, for financial health, all of these different things. Same here. Like, I'm not going to be able to post one video to someone on the left or a progressive that hears Bitcoin and is turned off automatically. And doing this long enough at this point, and you'll know that well too, bit tired of that. They'll still be able to access stuff, but I'm not going to be that person anymore. And I think majority of people are like, sweet, cool, Trey, we're here with you. We get that. Some people are like, I think that's the wrong decision.
Let me ask you this. If you had sponsors that were making this a profitable venture for you, something that you could do full time, would you change?
As in, like, the progressive Bitcoiner and doing right. That
the
kind
rebrand,
of that.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't.
Exactly.
Because I talked to the team about this a few months ago and was like, I can't keep doing this because I'm not that. Every time I go to a voting or a decision, I think case by case, and I outweigh what's the least worst option. That's kind of the camp I'm in. But I got into Bitcoin because I was frustrated with the political process to begin with. I do believe that more progressives than the left need to continue to be here. I do believe everything we talk about in the episodes won't change too much in terms of, I believe that Bitcoin is for everyone. I believe it is this worldwide phenomenon. I believe that it needs to be more than a niche libertarian project. My views have not changed. It's just my willingness and desire to call out the hypocrisy from our political processes in general, from our economic systems. I want to be more bold on that. And I feel more at home in that rather than trying to put out content and say, let me try to make this as friendly and green check for a typical Democrat voter as possible. Because I don't
Sure.
think, for me personally, that's doable. And I don't want to put words in his mouth. Maybe for Jason Mayer, that's more doable and that's his thing. Just for me and my truth, I kind of hate that term. But for me, that's not where I feel at home at. I feel more at home. Like I got into Bitcoin because I was frustrated with the political process. I did not get into Bitcoin to make it the most comfortable transition for Democrats and the left, even though I think there are so many things within Bitcoin that appeals to progressives, but they have to change their mindset a little bit. Just like Trump voters would have to adjust their mindset that Trump is not the savior of all of their economic problems. It's the
Right.
same. It's just that was my camp in my home.
Right. Try to rationalize the DeFi projects that he's putting out there.
Sure. Exactly.
No, I hear what you're saying, and I totally understand. I think what I was going to get at was the podcast always was, and I think still is, little p progressive, in that it was never supposed to be identification with a political party per se, but rather some of the issues that we believe to be more of a focus traditionally of those parties. And I just want to acknowledge that I think it's complete bullshit that you never got significant amount of sponsorship. It pisses me off. I know you've reached out to companies and individuals, and you know damn well they're not sponsoring you because of the word progressive, right? Mm. And I find that so incredibly hypocritical and selfish.
Yeah.
You listen to the podcast with Ovik Roy. It came just out on Ramp, and one of the things that he lays out that we all know is that the more people who have Bitcoin, the better it is for the network and reducing any potential legislative.
Lynn Alden calls it the left flank, protecting your left flank, literally attack vectors, 100%.
And these companies are not willing to put their neck out to support you.
No, they're on tour with Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, it's complete bullshit. And again, getting back to the Rorschach test, you're no different after finding Bitcoin. You're the same person. Mm-hmm. You're the same company. You don't stand for a free and open source network. When you can't stick your neck out there, you can't put your money where your mouth is and take on people whom you may not believe with politically, but you know that Bitcoin will benefit them. You're not willing to, you're too afraid of Twitter trolls.
Yeah.
And losing a few customers rather than the opportunity of a huge addressable market. Like who in the marketing team think that's a good idea? Oh, we're going to get trolled by a few people, saying that this is bullshit. Oh, by the way, we just brought on, tens of thousands of more customers because we supported Trey, and Trey was able to reach, that, again, the left flank. It's despicable in my opinion, and it doesn't stand for what a free and open source network is supposed to be.
It's funny because one of our sponsors, Bitbox, that I have a fantastic relationship with their team, and they're awesome and incredible. And it's a Switzerland-based company, and they're just kind of like, yeah, Bitcoin's for everyone. The American Bitcoin companies, no, they right. won't touch it with the longest pole imaginable. I do think back to that point to hone in, because I do want to. I mean, my natural mode, and I said this recently, is I've always been, whether it was in college, I had a lot of seminar type classes. I was a sociology major. This type of thinking out loud and kind of realizing things out loud happens on this podcast. And I really enjoy that. That's my way of breaking down, sitting down with really smart people I respect and breaking down some of the biggest questions of the world and just hitting record. Some episodes framing more questions than others. Like I want it to be a good listening experience for people as well. But I think me being authentic provides that best listening experience. So I think it was a bit twofold, where being engaged with politics and being engaged as that left guy in Bitcoin takes a significant emotional toll. That is not something I can do long term.
Right.
Secondly, it's not that my values haven't changed, but I came into the Bitcoin space and always considered myself a libertarian leaning progressive. I remember telling people this, and I still lean to that. I still lean left socially, all of these different things. And I have tried to articulate the lowercase p progressive, and Logan and I broke that down in a episode not too long ago, a few months ago. That hasn't quite translated yet the way that I would want. So if sponsors had come along and said, yes, we want to support specifically the progressive Bitcoiner, we want it to be honing in on that and having that be the identity. I don't want to focus that much on politics. For me, I always talk about progressive values on the show. You've made that clear. I've made that clear in continuing the show and trying to hit that forward. But to me too, to be as free and open to experiment the way that I want to, just as I grow and evolve, again, not away from any of those values, but just grow and evolve, to go to cool intellectual places, to lean into freedom of speech, to do all of these things I really believe in, and do it through this venture that this is not my full-time job. I have a full-time job. This isn't like, I'm not co-opted in a sense of like, I need to have money through this because I have another full-time job. It would be more difficult, probably practically, if this was my full-time thing. And if I wanted to rebrand and sponsors were like, no, then I'd have to be like, okay, well, how am I going to pay for my family and stuff? So this is not my full-time thing for me. I was frustrated about the lack of sponsorships because I was like, I think there's such potential to reach millions of people, and I still do. That can only happen if I have more time to do this. I can't do a full-time job and do that. Or if we have more people to support more video content and all this. Everyone working on this show is volunteer-based, and I'm so freaking lucky for that. Incredibly lucky. I feel guilty about it all the time. That's the reality, because people believe in this project and believe in what we're doing. And so thirdly, if someone did say, okay, this show's going to be sponsored, it has to be a progressive Bitcoiner, I'd probably start reaching out to people. I'd be like, I'm going to pursue something else. Maybe Jason, maybe you sprinkling in, maybe whoever wanted to do this. You might say, hell no. Like, somebody might say, I want to specifically have the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast and have Democratic politicians on the show, have specific people. For me, I'm more interested in wild independent thought and pursuing that. Not that you can't have the Progressive Bitcoiner without that, but that's just where I'm at with it, and why, regardless of all of that, I have to have a change with this, because I think it's my own mental thing with the show, that it's more freeing for me. And it has been, even the past few months, thinking about that. And I kept Progressive Bitcoiner because I reached out to you and was like, okay, I'm thinking about changing it, because I saw Trump on stage at Bitcoin Magazine, because all these things. And I'm like, God damn it. All right. We need to at least stick through through the election. And I was able to be a bit influential with networking and talking with some of the Crypto for Harris people, with telling them and hammering on, you need to talk. If you are in a room with someone and I'm not there, which I haven't been because they haven't reached back out, do with that what you will. You have to talk about Bitcoin mining. You have to talk about privacy. You have to talk about self-custody. You have to talk about developers being free and safe to develop open source software in America. If you're not talking about that to Kamala Harris's team, to progressives, to whatever, then I'm not a part of whatever you're doing, because that is the most important thing to me. The other crypto stuff or building up the industry,
what was the
or whatever.
What was the response to that?
Oh, I agree. That was a response. A couple of them that I know well, they're there with it. Got a few other people, and we're gonna continue to have. There's some other people, like Professor Tanya. She's gonna be on the show in a couple of weeks. Huge Kamala Harris supporter and things like. There's people still in the room more influential than me that I'm still talking to, and I'm trying to give the angle of like, please do not, whatever you do, have the Harris admin or progressive legislator or whatever demonize Bitcoin or promote crypto at the expense of Bitcoin. That's my biggest fear right now with where we're headed. So anyway, that is for me, just as a person in my soul, I have to move on from that. Yeah.
No, it's understandable. I think you have to protect yourself first and foremost, and the rebooting, it works well, because I think the left needs a reboot to be as well. I think there needs to be a lot of soul searching.
Yeah, this project for me too, I think over the years, initially it felt like I was educating, and I'm sure you felt this way as well. I was educating Bitcoiners a lot, saying not all progressives are communists that want to take over the world and, all this stuff, right? And we still do that. But a lot of that I just stopped listening to, because I'm like, even when I did say that, and even when people still trolled. And I'm like, you're not important to me. You know
Right.
who the people who don't troll that are maybe different, but more similar than not? Huddle. Great relationship with him. Great friendship. Great dude. Like there's some people in the space that whatever people's opinions and this and that, I'm just like, they're like, hey, we disagree, but cool. Do your thing because we need it and you need it. That's the people I care about. But at first it was like a lot of education for Bitcoiners.
Right.
It
Let me tell you what
was
you believe in.
yeah. A lot of that, a lot of saying, hey, most of my friends just don't know how money works and don't know how energy grids work. So progressives actually don't really think too much about, well, the central government needs to have this amount of control. A lot of times they're just like, hey, stop trying to like ban abortions for women. Stop trying to like dictate what our kids read in schools. Stop trying to shove your religion down my throat. Like the like progressive values. These are the things that
Right.
my friends and I talk about, or they talk about with me a lot. Their concern isn't like, they're not thinking about the Fed needs to have power, and they just don't know any of this stuff. So it's just a education piece. What I've learned though throughout this project, and I hope progressives on the left that really care and get into the weeds with us on this, is that they'll continue following along with me and others. Like Logan's a good example as well, that have come through this journey. We're kind of like really dissatisfied with politics in general. We still are going to be politically engaged in that we hope for a new and different world that looks different than our current political system, than our current, I'm team blue, I have the moral high ground. I'm team red, team blue, or communist evil people. You know, that I want nothing to do with that. And I understand that's still where the world is at. I'm hoping with rebooting money or whatever I write or involved with in the future, people can still comfortably know me and refer to, okay, Trey's on the left, Trey's progressive, this and that. That's all fine. But I do think I'd be doing a disservice if I didn't pretend that coming into Bitcoin and learning the things that I care about is different than being just a pure team blue or pure team red type approach. It is different.
More
That
than
does not
just being
mean
a
you can't
label.
be a right. So I want to lean more into this is new rather than lean into the progressive Bitcoiner. And that's just me personally. If someone else really wants to lean into the progressive Bitcoiner, I'm still having those conversations. And that I think that is ripe for the taking.
Just make sure you leave time to run for office, man.
Yeah, we'll see. I really like the idea of local office. I really do. Like, I really like my local town, my local city. I don't like the idea of campaigning. I like the idea of actually being in office and doing stuff. I used to want to be like chief of staff. That used to be my dream job in government. I have a few friends that work in local office and state reps and things like that. That's very interesting. Federally, it's harder for me to see that because local office, I see the direct impacts and I know a lot of the people doing it. And it's less about your political ideology and more about like responding to things in the community and doing, a lot of things. And another personal conviction of mine, I think we are moving more in that direction. I'm still trying to settle my feelings on that a little bit. Do I think our full federal government will exist and be here forever or for many years to come? I'm not so sure. Am I really bullish on local community politics? Yeah. So I see that more clearly. Yeah. So I'm curious, even because I know, even with you stepping back from the podcast and everything that you had been through, even at that point in time with the podcast, did you feel some of those same things? Where was that? Was that as conflicting for you as it is for me? Not like the name of the podcast, but just the balance of trying to appeal to progressives on the left where they're at, while also knowing this is different. And there are some things that do need to change, just like there would be some things that need to change from any other political ideology. It just so happens that's our background, that's our communities, things like that. Because for me, that became more and more overwhelming as time went on.
Oh, for sure. Learning about money, learning about the history of money, learning about Bitcoin opens up this whole other perspective on every single issue that you've cared about, in your adult life. It's just a different lens by which to look at things. And that new way of viewing the world, honestly, is isolating in a way. You're the crazy person nobody wants to talk to because you don't affirm their their prior beliefs like you used to, and you bring up Bitcoin and et cetera, every time. And it makes it isolating. It makes it hard. And that's why we started the podcast. But from a content creation, it wasn't such a great idea because you're fighting an uphill battle on both sides. You're trying to appeal to people on the left, your home, quote unquote, while still trying to say, hey, we're not the baddies to the people on the right.
Yeah. Well, you're trying to do a startup without a product market fit. It's kind of like the Steve Jobs approach. You're going to sell people on what they need and will want, but there's an uphill battle. You're a startup with no funding and no investors or no people that want to support that and no product market fit.
Yeah.
In a way.
But while it seems like a struggle, I shouldn't say seems, it was a struggle to create and a huge time commitment. You created something, right? All those episodes that are out here, all your social media engagement that I could never have done, that has created something that has and will continue to have lasting effects in the space. People, David and Bailey and others, I don't think have given you enough credit for what you have done. Like we're this movement there that the majority of social media Bitcoiners don't readily want to acknowledge. But if they would just lean into it a little bit more, I think it'd be a great benefit to the entire space. And so while we may feel that it's still this kind of fringe side of things, we're that little movement over there. I think it's bigger than that. I think you've had a much bigger impact than is readily apparent. Yeah. So I'm proud of you, Trey. I just want you to know that you've really hustled a lot.
And I know you are. I appreciate that. And none of it would have happened without you. None of it would have happened without the people starting these little progressive chats and things like that beforehand. And I think, like with anything in Bitcoin, I view it as a life cycle thing. I do view it just very practically too. There are a lot more resources out there, right? Which is really exciting. Like, I think one of the things I was joking about, not a product market fit and all these things, but the progressive Bitcoiner is and was the only one doing this thing, right? So that's what made it unique and why it had and has so much potential still is because no one else is doing it to this degree. But there are more people coming out of the word work, writing, joining forces at like Human Rights Foundation and others that are talking about similar things that we are and articulating that. There's more, for better, for worse, but for better, very practically, more younger Democrats in the House saying like crypto and Bitcoin is about financial inclusion. We'll work on the crypto thing, but these things are warming up more. It's not as isolating as it once was. So it's also very practically, if this didn't exist or I stopped doing things publicly, I know there's a lot of people still carrying the torch of these things that we care about, speaking to progressive values, all of these things. The environmental narratives, gosh, have changed so much of the couple of years. There's just no wind left in those sails there is a little bit, but it's not as gaining as much traction as the height of 22 when, the environmental narrative, it was only negative and they weren't willing to publish any sort of data. Mm-hmm. And now we've caught up and, it's probably been reduced by like 50%. It's still out there, but it's easier to debunk. And it's also easy to hold to accountable Bitcoin miners that aren't doing their part, right? It's easier to call them out and say, hey, there's a microscope on this industry. Do the right thing here. You know what I'm talking about.
That was one other thing I had thought about with regard to Bitcoiners running as politicians. I think our ability to community check each other and call out bullshit. Can you imagine what the Bitcoin community would do to a
That's
Bitcoiner
such a good
politician?
Point. We're really good at that, for better, for worse. But for better, Bitcoiners are super on like more Bitcoiners running in Matt Odell just weekly on like Rabbit Hole Recap, being like, "Well, Trey did this stupid fucking thing last week in legislation." That'd be great.
Your inbounds would just be exhausted.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, like fuck you with like 500 sats attached.
Yeah.
That'd be funny. Yeah. Wow. Well, Mark, we've already done an hour and a half, and I know we can keep talking more, but this was great. This is very cathartic. I wanted to do a bit of a review of the pod with you, a catch up with you. I think it was a good call to action too for people just to think on, and maybe just to end with that note. A lot of the theme of this, obviously reflecting on the progressive Bitcoiner and all of these things where we're at in this in this cycle. What is your kind of maybe final call to action for people? I know that you're wrestling with that pessimism. I know that you're wrestling with what, how is this all going to shape out? But a huge theme of this title, it's probably going to be the podcast title, is what are you going to do about it? What would you encourage people that are listening, that want to be more involved, that want to see the world that we're not just the world we're talking about, but just see a better world, a more hopeful world where people aren't fighting so much and so much pain, whether practically, health wise, monetary, all of these things? What are some final thoughts you have on that?
Just a real softball question right there.
Yeah.
I guess I'd break that down into two considerations. One is your personal life and your how you interact with those you meet from day to day, whether at work or on the street. And I'll take one thing from Mike Novogratz over the years, in that he said, if you have any capability, if you make any money in this space, just try to be a baller, quote unquote. And that means being good to people with your time and your money. And so I try to do that. I try to tip well. There's always somebody, an unhoused person outside of a local co-op for groceries, and I will always get extra bit of money to give to them. I like those random acts of kindness, and I think they have a tremendous impact on the individual, but also for your oneself. And it's that the joy that something small like that does for you as an individual, I think far outweighs and so much more worth it than the either ignoring it, being upset by it, or worse, just getting apathetic to it. And so that be mindful of your stress and your anger. It's hard. It's hard to pause for that moment and check it. But that's the one thing that I've been trying to do over the past few years, is just like, as I feel that water start to boil, why is it doing that? How can I prevent it? What did that person say? Why did that person upset me? And 9 times out of 10, they made me feel wrong, or that I knew I did something wrong, and they called me on it. So those two things from an individual: be mindful of your thoughts and actions. Try to pause before reacting, and to be a baller to the extent that you can. And from a political, social, broader scale perspective, I think focusing specifically on Bitcoin and what you can do breaks down to, again, what I've already mentioned. One, if you're so inclined, running for office with Bitcoin in mind. Two, gifting. I think getting Bitcoin in the hands of as many people as possible is obviously going to be incredibly important. And so that could be things like using River to gift people Bitcoin. That means fucking sponsoring your podcast to get your message out to more people, to doing what is difficult. It may not seem advantageous to your bottom line, but when you're getting more people on board in the Bitcoin community, it will be beneficial, because it's more people using your app or whatever you are as a sponsor, but also more people that have it, again, less likely to have adverse legislation. And then lastly is it's the thing that I'm most pessimistic about, and it's the leading a life of not questioning, because we feel that that's inexamined. Yeah, as Socrates said, as an examined life. Um, it's so hard to do, and I think we can
Mm-hmm.
say that we're doing it, um, but I think you've hit the nail on the head when it makes you feel uncomfortable,
Yeah.
and and you're uncomfortable around maybe some people whom you thought you initially agreed with. Um, but it gets you to a better spot eventually in life, and hardens the relationships that are meant to be hardened. And it's just how you grow. And I think so many of us are okay with the comfort and the stagnation. Um, but again, I can tell you with over a dozen years of experience that when you're dying on your deathbed, those are the things that you regret.
Mm-hmm.
And um, I fight every day with family and friends about that exact sentiment. It's like, you got to go, you got to grab life and take a bite out of it. And that also means um, being compassionate with others. And yeah, I'm beginning to, I think, veer off into a bit more emotional topics. So we'll end it there. Those are my pro tips.
Yeah. Do you want to plug, as you're even talking, I even just think about your book that I think is still just awesome. That maybe it's been a year and a half now, 2 years since you put out, but anything else you want to plug for people to follow along with your thoughts? Your medical background, which we didn't even get into, but a lot of these things that some people know about you, but anything else I want to make sure that you plug for our audience here.
The parallels between uh, politics, Bitcoin, and health and the healthcare system, I think, are so strong.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically from a political standpoint, at least speaking from the left, we look toward the government to fix healthcare, quote unquote, to provide all of these services that we need for ourselves and for the underserved. And while I am not arguing at all that those shouldn't try to be optimized and improved, I'm just trying to tell you that it's unlikely to happen anytime soon. In your life, your health does not have time to wait, right? You cannot be at the whims of the Supreme Court legislation. You cannot rely on Roe v. Wade to be around for the entirety of your life, right? So you need to take ownership of your health, and I think for several reasons. One, as Hoddle mentioned before, or maybe it was Eric, taking care of yourself is the oxygen mask. His metaphor is perfect.
Huddle said that.
Because in order to take care of others, you cannot compromise your own health and your own lifestyle. I see it all the time. It's usually the wife, who has to take care of her husband and his bad habits over the years, and that's her full-time job as a caregiver, and
Mm-hmm.
her health starts to be compromised. And so it's important that you understand that taking care of yourself is the best way to take care of others. And from a left perspective, we can't ignore the power of the individual. We can't ignore the power that you have in your own hands to take care of you, your family, and your community, and not necessarily um, offshore that to a third party or the government, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's incumbent upon us to take that on. And additionally, it's not going to provide you. The healthcare system is not going to provide you with health. It's a reactionary system that treats disease, puts band-aids on chronic disease. It's up to you to really prevent those and manage them in the first place, and that's through lifestyle changes, which again are incredibly hard. That's talking about change, which I mentioned before. But I see it as a completely binary decision. You either take that on or you're going to be involved in the healthcare system that nobody is happy with. And I can assure you is not going to provide you with the experience that you want for you and your loved ones at the time that you need it most. And so that's where I think really focusing on yourself is not a selfish act when you're better to be able to provide for others in doing so.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the focus of the book. It's called Sovereign Health. You can buy it on Amazon. And it goes through why I believe the healthcare system is not designed to provide you with health, kind of the historical reasons for that. And then what you can do to take ownership of your health and live your best life, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, that's what I've learned a lot through any role that I want to have, or even just thinking of my own life. When you get to a place where you're trying to think about things like Bitcoin, things about global financial system, things about privacy and freedom for all, it makes you think about yourself. It makes you start to live an examined life or start to go through that process. And the way Eric had said it in the last episode was, you can't stick your head in the sand, right? You have to be with the hurt and the pain and seeing the world as it is to push through to a better world. And right now, the easiest, a majority are sticking their head in the sand. And again, too many people associate that with, oh, you have to jump into every conspiracy. No, that's not what I'm talking about. Some people will say any talk of this is conspiracy. They're a part of the problem. But there are some, like I'd mentioned, those that just make a ton of money based on conspiracy. And that's a different problem. But live and examine life. That is the Bitcoiner's journey, I think, in my mind. If that is the best of what we can do, because if the whole point is just to stack and help make BlackRock as rich as possible, and the world is the same or worse in a different way, that's not what we're here for, in my opinion.
Thank you, Trey, for having me on. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And yeah, maybe I think people seem to be vibing with the new shakeup of the show. At least downloads are suggesting that. So I hope to continue bringing as real and authentic and raw conversations as possible through this channel.
No, absolutely.
I'm excited for it.
I think it's a great angle.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for your friendship, for everything over the years. We'll have to do this again soon. And I know a lot of people will love hearing from you after so long.
Thanks, Trey. I appreciate it.